Worksheet called Table Conversion, we've got a list of data. And clicking on a cell, double-clicking its bottom edge, we can see it goes down to row 762. If you work with lists, particularly lists that grow and shrink, you can treat the data as a unit more comprehensively if you convert the data to a table. Now, converting data to a table means that all of this data here is going to have a certain look. It will automatically allow us to add to the table, either at the bottom or on the right-hand side, and always be treating the data as a unit, as an entity. Now, if you have worked with some of the data management features in Excel, there's always that concern, is all my data being treated together? In other words, do I have to scroll up and down and check for empty rows, that sort of thing? Or did I add that data at the bottom? Is it going to be sorted if I sort all the data? If you convert data to a table, you don't worry about those issues nearly as often. So, before converting data to a table, make sure that the data is together. And you can simply click within the data and press Control A, think of A for all, and then, a not so well-known tip, but pressing Control period simply will move the active cell around the four corners of the range. Do that a few times, and if you hadn't known how deep this was, how many rows it takes up, as soon as you see what looks like the bottom of the list, just scroll a bit more to make sure. Now, this ensures, by the way, that there are no empty rows within the data. Now, jumping back up top, Control period, a few times back up top, click anywhere within the data, and then consider converting this into a table. Now, there are two keystroke shortcuts for doing this, and initially you might not use them, but if you find yourself converting data to a table often, you'll want to press Control T or Control L. Think of T for table, L for list. If you happen to have encountered this feature on the Home tab, you'll see it out in the Styles group. As you slide over the option, Format as Table, the description doesn't really give you a reason for using this feature. It says, quickly convert a range of cells to a table with its own style. Well, okay, that sounds nice, and maybe it is, but you might also encounter this on the Insert tab. And here, as we slide over Table, it gives us a stronger rationale for why we would want to do this. Create a table to organize and analyze related data. Tables make it easy to sort, filter, and format data within a sheet. That gives us some real reasons for doing this. I'm going to click Table, and Excel nearly always gets it right. It makes a guess at where your contiguous data is. It gets it right in this case, down to row 762, all the way out to column L. It also recognizes that your table has headers if it does. If for some reason it doesn't see this, could be because you've got some missing field names, so you might need to check that. If it's a list where you didn't yet put in titles, then of course you don't want Excel to mistakenly use your first row of data as titles, so in those cases, pretty rare, you'd uncheck this. So let's click OK. And immediately a style is applied, and furthermore, there's a contextual design tab that appears in the ribbon under the heading Table Tools. Sometimes you'll see this described as a new ribbon called Table Tools with a tab called Design, but nevertheless, we see this. As we click within the table, anywhere, that's still present. I'm going to click out in column N, watch the ribbon, the Design tab disappears. Now, those of you familiar with charting know that there's a Design tab, but this is a completely different Design tab than you would see if you were working with a chart. So clicking back within the data, we're back to the Design tab with options that pertain to tables. What might catch your eye initially are table styles, 61 options out here, and as we slide over these, we get a preview as to what we might be seeing color-wise. And keep scrolling downward, and some of these might be a little bit hard on the eyes, and certainly for printing reasons or display reasons, some of these might not be what you want, but you can explore and you can change these at any time. All of them have a feature in common called banded rows. I'm going to use one of these options right here. And we see in that contextual tab banded rows. I can turn this off. I could choose banded columns. Don't choose both. It looks kind of ridiculous. Let's go back to banded columns for the moment. If you like banded columns, that's fine. Notice that your table style previews are also using banded columns right now as we slide over some of the options. So depending upon your preference, you might want to choose banded columns. It's much more common to see banded rows. So clicking back in the data, let's switch to banded rows after turning off banded columns. This means, by the way, if we insert a row, suppose I'm going to put some data right above Robert Peters here, right-click row 6, insert. Notice how the banded row idea automatically kicks in. Make sure that every other row is a darker color and lighter color. really don't need to do that right now, so I'll change my mind, right click, and delete row 6, and once again, the banded row feature automatically readjusts. We can give special emphasis to the first column. Usually this makes the print bold, but it might, depending upon a different style here, actually change some color options like this as we slide over some of these choices. So that's another option as well too. You can give special emphasis to the last column, and again, the example here, we don't have any data in that just yet, so that's not very effective just yet. Now, another aspect of tables is that we see filter arrows here. That doesn't mean that we need to filter necessarily, but they're there and we can use them wherever needed. Here's a filter button. If you don't want to use those right now, you can certainly turn them off, but you can turn them off, turn them on. I think most of you know too, if you were to print the data, the filter arrows don't show whether they're visible on the screen or not. So you might as well leave them on, or at least it doesn't hurt. Now, something that will definitely catch your eye as you look at row 1, and I'll zoom in to make this even more obvious. I'm holding down the control key here as I'm using the mouse wheel. I'll adjust column D and E, double click the boundary. But keep an eye on row 1 and the column letters. I'm about to use the mouse wheel to scroll downward, and look what happens. The column letters disappear, and the data in the header row is now at the top of the screen as we scroll up and down. Now as I scroll up, when we do make row 1 visible, now the column letters return. And I think that's what most people would probably want. In other words, at any time when we're looking at the data, we know clearly what each column is about. We see the heading at all times. Whether we zoom in or out is not really the issue. It's this idea here that we will see the field names on top unless we scroll to view row 1. And of course, the field names are in row 1. So that's handy too at different times. So I'm going to go to any cell, double click its bottom edge. If we add data to the bottom, it's automatically part of the table. I'm not going to do much typing here, but I'll type in a name. And as soon as I press tab or enter, that automatically becomes highlighted. Therefore, it's part of the table above, whether I complete the entries or not. All formulas are copied downward. I've got a formula here for years of service. Even if I put in the current date, this formula will react. Obviously, 116 years is not going to be the real answer here. But there's a formula right here that tabulates years of service. And so it automatically got copied downward as I added new information on the bottom. Now, as it turns out, this person really wasn't hired, so I'll simply, in this case, undo that action in the retyping. Jump to the top of the screen, Control Home. Maybe I'm going to put in new compensation or a bonus column, something like that. Look what happens when I add the word bonus or any heading here. As I press enter, look what happens. That too automatically becomes part of a table. So again, the table concept enhances the idea of treating your data as a unit, as an entity. If it's based on the data, it will automatically grow. You don't have to redefine the source data for a chart. That's an advantage as well too. Another advantage too is if you're going to be using this data as the source for a pivot table, anytime you add new records at the bottom, they become part of the table automatically. You will have to refresh your pivot table, but you won't have to redefine as you work with the pivot table where the source data is. Excel will automatically pick up any records you add at the bottom. A simple refresh of your pivot table, if it's based on this data, will automatically update. So there are some major advantages to converting data to a table. And it has that certain look, and you'll probably get used to it, even though you could override the formatting here. When you see this banded row look, nearly always it means that the data has been converted to a table, and that again makes it easier to work with. There's one aspect of this that could be considered a negative. You might or might not be familiar with a feature called subtotal. It is covered in later movies in this course, but when the active cell is within a table, or in other words, if you're working with a table, if you go to the data tab, you'll notice the feature called subtotal is not workable. It is not available with the table. If you've worked with that feature a lot and have come to like it, you cannot use it if the data is a table. There could be times, maybe that could be the reason, where you say, I don't want this data to be a table anymore. What do? On the Design tab, remember the contextual tab that's available when you've got a table, here's an option here, Convert to Range. Convert this table into a normal range of cells. All of the data is preserved. Let's do this here, example. Do you want to convert the table to a normal range? Yes, there it is. Now the coloring still stays, and so for a while you might say, oh, gee, this looks like a table. Well, it isn't anymore. And how can you tell? Well, whenever the active cell's in it, where's that contextual tab that we saw earlier? That only appears if you've clicked inside of a table. This is no longer a table. And by the way, if you want to clean up the coloring here, one approach would be simply drag across the columns here, and then on the Home tab here, click the drop arrow for the bucket, choose No Fill, and then maybe possibly reapply it across the top row here. And you might also want to get rid of the yellow, the orange grid lines that you see in the background here. Simply drag across the column letters, A through M here, and then within the font group on the Home tab, click the drop arrow for borders and choose No Border. And now they resume their gray. So we've seen the techniques for creating a table, converting data to a table. We've also shown you how to remove a table if you don't need it. But I would encourage you to try the feature. It does treat the data as if it were an entity. It makes it easier to work with as you consider using filtering and sorting. It does have that detriment for some. Remember, you cannot use within a table the subtotal feature. It's available now. This is the data, of course, that had